Okay. We hope you all have enjoyed your meal and had some stimulating conversations surrounding social justice. Remember to save your questions and comments that came up in discussion for the end for our panelists that are present today. But before we move any forward, I would like to honor the 50th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech at Rec Hall on campus. So this is a very important year for us here at Penn State.
This is also the year that we celebrate 30 years since former Penn State President Bryce Jordan formed the President's Planning Committee for Martin Luther King Jr.'s recognition. Our theme for this year is now more than ever, and we asked our 4 contestants to speak upon the question posed. Identify and explain a significant event that you believe has affected the progression of social and cultural justice. How can this year's theme be used to positively contribute to or counteract these obstacles?
Join me in welcoming our first contestant, Anjali Krishnan. She's a senior majoring in accounting and international politics. Please give her a round of applause as she comes forward.
Hello. Okay. All right. Good evening, and thank you everyone for being here. So around 7 years ago, I had big bushy eyebrows. I had my hair resembled a small bush, and I had a significant Indian accent. I also had a dot on my forehead, and this is called the bindi. It's a Hindu tradition among women to wear a bindi on my forehead, and to me, having a bindi on my forehead was innate to how I looked. When I looked in the mirror, if I didn't see a bindi on my forehead, I would freak out and run and grab a bindi and put it on. To me, that's what made me look pretty. Around 7 years ago, I lived in the Middle East, and I attended an Indian school. And to me, wearing the bindi was beautiful. And it's around this time that I started a new chapter in my life, and I moved to Toronto, Canada. And I still remember walking in to the first day of my school, and I blatantly looked fresh off the boat. Of course, I had my dot on my forehead, but I also had like my baggy jeans and no sense of fashion. But what I immediately realized as soon as I walked into my middle school in Toronto was that I was an outsider. Something I distinctly remember is that all Indian immigrants, or all immigrants in general, were required to take an English proficiency test. And although I had spoken English all my life, it was the first language I ever spoke. It's what I spoke at home. I walked in with another Australian immigrant, and the teacher said, "Oh, honey," to the Australian, "Oh, you're fine." Whereas to me, I had to take the test, even though FYI, India has the second largest number of English speakers in the world, second to America. So I just, already felt like an outsider. Before I moved to Canada, when I found out I was moving there, I envisioned my group of friends to resemble much like the diversity poster that you see everywhere with all the different colors of hands. I thought, that's what my friend group would look like. But instead, I was met with harshness, and I almost felt inferior to the other students at my school, even though there was a large Asian population. Instead, my friend group resembled more a whole lot of brown hands. It was just a bunch of the immigrants all hanging out together and getting through the day. So anyways, I started my time in North America not really thinking much of my appearance until one day a girl in my class, she said, "Oh, you'd look a lot more beautiful if you didn't have that dot on your head." And that really affected me. That day I went home, and for the first time in 13 years of my life, I took it off and looked at myself in the mirror, and I said, wow, maybe I could look like this. And I decided, no more of this. I always considered myself an extrovert, so just like you turn off a light switch, I just turned on this American accent. I started talking like this, and I went to school, and I suddenly had this burst of confidence. I was like, wow, now I look like everyone else, I talk like everyone else, and things are going to be great. And I entered high school, and I was so glad that I'm going to be with new people who had never known that I used to wear a bindi and never knew that I had an accent. I remember once a guy that I liked was coming over to do homework or something, and I literally scratched off photos of me with a dot with the bindi on my head of photos hanging on the wall because I didn't want him to know. I became obsessed with this person who wanted to be like everyone else. And then at my junior year of high school, I moved to New Jersey, and it was around the time, a couple years later, that I heard of the Dot Busters. And this is a significant event I want to talk about today. The Dot Busters were a racist group that existed in the 1980s in Jersey City, and they specifically targeted Hindu women and Indian immigrants, and they harassed them and vandalized their property. In the most horrific cases, they even killed some Indian immigrants in hate crime. And I remember when I heard of this story, even though it happened in the 1980s, a decade before I was even born, I immediately felt this pang of guilt. I felt like, okay, I'd become so obsessed with becoming this person had I lost myself in this struggle to become this person. And today I'm here to talk about what that really meant for me. I'd like to say that today, I walk around wearing a bindi on my forehead, but I don't. Becoming an immigrant and being part of the society had changed me so much that now I had become this person. And it kind of made me realize that, we talk a lot about cultural differences. We always talk about, wow, like look at how different, China is, or look at how different that person is who wears a turban on their forehead or prays 6 times a day. But we don't talk much about understanding those differences and focusing on how really insignificant those differences are. Because what I realized is there's more than, cultural differences are important, but the understanding that we're at the end is just a human connection, that's even more important. And I came to realize that, this accent that I had, this dot that I put on my head, this, these cultures that I focus so much on, they're all man-made. And the only thing that's innate is that we're all human. And I think that's how we can counteract this phenomenon of where racist activities exist based on physical differences. And that's a realization I came to today. I'd like to end by something that actually literally happened today. I was walking in the hub, and I saw a girl with a bindi on her forehead, and she was hanging out with a bunch of white guys. And I thought to myself, wow, 8 years ago, if I decided, hey, you know what, I'm going to stick with this bindi, it's been a part of who I am, would I have had the same group of friends? Today, I have a really, diverse group of friends. I wonder if I had a bindi on my head, would I be hit on by the same guys at the club or at the bar? Would people still talk to me the same way they did? And I just hope that if we focus on this idea of, wow, at the basic level, we're all just humans with these like man-made cultural differences, maybe I wouldn't have to even think about that question. So that's it. Thank you.
Please give Anjali another round of applause, please. Okay, so our second contestant for the night is named Yusuf Saba. Yusuf is a junior majoring in broadcast journalism and international politics, so give him a round of applause, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, students, faculty members, and staff. It is my honor to stand before you today in the memory of one of the most courageous men in history, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. What is social justice? For many, it is the idea of justice in distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society. However, for many, it is also just that, merely an idea. A lot of times it seems as though the concept is impossible to turn into reality. Despite this, the desire for justice is one that is innate in human nature. It is for this reason that over the decades, the world has witnessed movements that have rocked cities, governments, countries, and indeed the entire international community in the pursuit for social and cultural justice. Perhaps the most striking example of this in recent history is that of the so-called Arab Spring, a phenomenon that shook a region where change was unthinkable. Oppression reigned in Arab countries. Police states and authoritarian rule were the norm. How could a dynasty of strongman rulers be brought down by some people chanting public squares? It all seemed futile. As an Egyptian, these days and their aftermath relay in my head day and night. A great deal of blood was spilled for the sake of bread, freedom, and social justice, the slogan of the Egyptian Revolution of 2011. Today, Egypt is once again under the firm rule of a former military general. The dreams of justice and freedom that led thousands to sacrifice their lives and millions to spend cold nights in the streets and endure tirades of tear gas, water cannons, and rubber bullets now seem like a distant past. Despite the perceived failure of a revolution in Egypt, chaos in Libya, full-blown war in Syria, one glimmer of hope remained, the sole success story of the Middle East, Tunisia. Even with the shortcomings of the Arab Spring, such a movement in perhaps one of the most oppressive regions in the world has become a beacon of inspiration and courage. It has prompted an international reevaluation of the meaning of social justice. Not long after it, similar pro-democracy and justice movements swept across almost every corner of the globe. This was seen in the cases of Greece, Russia, Spain, Portugal, Brazil, China, the London student protests, and probably more notably in Ukraine. More recently, protests against police brutality erupted across a number of cities right here in the United States. While it may not be, so we must not ignore the fact that in Egypt, for example, police brutality was one of the main sparks of the revolution. This draws a strong parallel between these two movements, and indeed between all of these global movements. While it may not be immediately obvious that police brutality is a result of social injustice, the cases of Michael Brown and Eric Garner made it immediately clear that issues of race, class, social justice, and police brutality are inextricably tied. It is therefore the responsibility of each and every one of us, despite our race, background, or social position, to continue the fight for social and cultural justice. We must take it upon ourselves to educate ourselves, and in turn, others, of the true meaning of tolerance, justice, and equality. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusuf. Our third contestant this evening is Ramon Guzman. Ramon Guzman is a senior majoring in education and public policy. Please give him a round of applause as he comes forward.
Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. We blast our music and tweet to our friends because silence bothers us. Even the most introverted person writes on a diary because silence bothers them. Good evening, and thank you to the Gamma Nu chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated and the 2015 Martin Luther King Jr. Commemoration Committee for the opportunity to be here addressing all of you today. In 1787, when the Constitution of they, the people, and us, other persons, was written, we were considered at all, if anything, the bottom of society, the bottom tier of society. Yet, like contemporary poet Aubrey Graham says, we started from the bottom, now we're here. Now, more than ever, it is important for all of America to know that we are all here. That we includes whites, but also blacks, Latinos, and Asians. It includes the lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and transgenders. It includes gays, lesbians, bisexuals, and transgenders, and also those from different religions, Christians, Muslim, Jews, and Buddhists, and other socio-cultural categorical groups in our society. It also includes all people of all color, all women of all color, and all ages. And that we also includes a young, undocumented 10-year-old little boy that, like in 2006, today he stands in front of a crowd addressing the issues of Dr. King's and his inspirations of men of color who have positively impacted and affected his life. I was that little boy. I came into the United States from the Dominican Republic in 2001, knowing very little English and always interested in who was my president. Was it still Clinton? Because my mom always talked about him in our kitchen from the one-bedroom apartment that we lived in for 5 years. Sorry. I kept on learning English and realized it was Bush. I finally figured that out. And then she looked at me and kind of thought I knew that because I was smart, but I didn't know much. I always heard Clinton being the best person in the room. I always imagined that I couldn't wait for the next election to happen because I wanted that guy to leave office simply because he was so mean. After all, he and I were both little kids. But on election day, I didn't have school, and I asked my mom, "Did you vote?" I urged her to go out and vote. She looked away and said, "I can't," and just went to the kitchen. I figured she couldn't because she was probably busy making food. Just before we had gone to the corner store, bought some plátanos, and I rushed her to the kitchen to hurry up and make them so we can go and watch the results of the election on TV, in a Spanish TV channel, Univision. Right there, I heard what I didn't know. Ahora, la mayoría de los ciudadanos ya han votado. Estamos esperando por los resultados. The news reporter said, the majority of the citizens have already voted. We're just waiting for the results. Now, the majority of citizens have already voted, and I turned to her and said, ¿Eres ciudadana? Are you a citizen? She told me to hurry up, eat my plátanos, don't worry about it, that we'll be all right. In the Constitution, Amendment 15, Section 1 gives the citizens of the United States the right to vote, regardless of their race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Amendment 19 gives the citizens of the United States the right to vote, regardless of their sex. And Amendment 26, Section 1 gives the citizens of the United States who are 18 years old or older the right to vote, regardless of their age. On December 13, 2013, just before I turned 19, I became a proud American citizen. I speak as a first-generation college student and a foreign-born, naturalized American citizen when I say all voices matter. Knowing the language and the ability to speak out about our thoughts and opinions matter. Now, as a citizen, I can vote. When the public school of my community isn't well-funded because of our zip code, now I can vote for a more sustainable budget. When the students in my future classroom as an educator can enjoy the richness of their childhood in their local neighborhood parks because they are in danger of uncontrolled gang violence, now I can vote for safer communities. When our next class of high school graduates is the target of racially motivated police brutality, now I can vote for proper training of our public authority. When it is 2015, and institutionalized racism and microaggressions lead us to limited opportunities and they still exist, we must vote. When you care about the community, you strive every day to do something greater than your own and than you did yesterday and close the gaps that continue to pull us back, we must vote. If you wish to let freedom ring and respect the legacy of those who have given their lives for you to live freely, you, and I, we must vote. Before I came back to school this semester, my mom, in her broken English, said, "Mijo, guess what?" I looked at her, she was speaking English. I said, "What?" She says, "This year, I will become a U.S. citizen." She said that because she knows that if you are a citizen, that means you can vote. She knows, and I know, and now you know, that our vote means our voice is heard. So don't continue to live in silence. It bothers us. It is no longer enough to know our history. We must respect our history. We must act historically and speak out, speak for peace. Now, more than ever, vote. Thank you.
Okay, so please give Ramon another round of applause, please. Our fourth and final contestant for the night goes by Shalom Sine. She's a junior majoring in biology.
Hello. I'm glad to be here and to be talking about important issues in an open and respectful setting. It's vital for us and ultimately the entire nation to be able to talk about our problems and their causes in order to find real solutions. The shooting of Michael Brown in August of 2014 had an incredibly widespread impact on events of the rest of the year. Protests against his death and later against the death of Eric Garner sparked many a rally, many a handheld sign, and a lot of media attention and national conversation. On December 20th of 2014, police officers Wenjin Liu and Rafael Ramos were tragically and wrongfully killed by Ismail Brinsley in reaction to the lack of indictment for those responsible for the death of Eric Garner. I saw a CNN headline about this incident that read something like, "Will the shooting silence Ferguson protesters?" But this seems like the wrong question to be asking. The actions of a few violent protesters should not suddenly become the defining message of an entire movement. Likewise, the actions of a few violent police officers should not bring on the notion that all cops are bad. The conversation surrounding these events should never have been about whether cops are bad or Black people are good, or vice versa. To say it out loud, it sounds ridiculous. Of course, it can't be the case that one group of people is fully in the right all the time, while another is fully in the wrong all the time. But that's how the media and not a few politicians have been treating the matter. Taking sides, assigning blame, when really we are all on the same side, and arguing back and forth like this is ridiculous. This is not the national equivalent of when your high school best friends broke up and you had to pick a favorite. The shooting of Michael Brown was a terrible tragedy and doesn't call for us to pick sides. It calls for us all to stand together and take this opportunity of national attention to focus on finding a real, long-term, impactful solution to the problem in this country of built-in systemic racism. We can't find these solutions without looking at the root causes of their problems. It's time for us as a country to take a good look at the harsh realities of our history and admit that the darkest moments of our past still affect us today. The way our forefathers treated Native Americans was wrong. Slavery was wrong. Segregation was also wrong. All of these problems have real, lasting impacts to this day, and every time we try to take steps towards equality, toward healing these wounds, those pushing us forwards are met with adversity. Thus, we don't reach healing. At most, we get a few one-size-fits-all Band-Aids to cover up the pain. What if, though, we as a society decided that enough was enough, that social justice was an important enough issue that we would refuse to stand in its way? What if this time we stood together and all pushed forward? Perhaps the burden would not then be so heavy for those who are fighting for justice now. And I know it sounds idyllic, But the good news about most people today is that we do really want the same things. We all want equality. The majority of the people in this country at least know today that racism is bad. We all want to close the wealth gap between races. Some people come off as if they blame minorities for being poorer on average than white people, but these people can't possibly really believe that something is wrong with an entire race. Now it's time for us to take the next step. From knowing racism is wrong to acknowledging the privileges some of us experience. Wherever there is an imbalance in society, someone is benefiting from this imbalance, and those in whose favor the system currently works may have motivation to deny the existence of privilege. If they did concede it, they of course would stand to lose their advantage. As a white middle-class student at a good school, I'm one of the people who experiences privilege. But in the end, in the long run, those with privilege must also realize that when the playing field is not level, we all lose. In contrast, it's readily apparent that everyone would have something to gain if the system were more fair. If the humanistic promise of a more just society isn't appealing enough, there are economic and other more tangible benefits of having a balanced society. I'm sure I could talk about those for a while, but perhaps that's a whole other speech for another day. We all have a lot of common ground. All minorities, all white people, all genders, races, and ethnicities. I believe that if we were to take a closer look, we'd find that in the end, we all want the same things. So let's stand together. Let's meet and have discussions and set goals and plan ways to reach them. Let's keep holding events like this, giving everyone a voice to speak out. Let's stop pretending that there is no problem or that the problem is unsolvable. Because social justice goes beyond politics and other barriers. It's not just a conversation. It's not just a dry policy or an empty promise. Social justice is an action. It impacts everyone who works for it and everyone for whom it works. It's a shift in our cultural mindset from exclusive to accepting, from impressive to inviting, and from silence to openness and truth. And when pursued, it provides real change. Thank you.